Welcome back to the Human Longevity Project. In episode 1, we saw how mitochondria guide the aging process. And in episode 2, we saw the many ways in which microbiota control function. With this new understanding, the stage has been set for the rest of the series as we examine various lifestyle factors that impact these two systems and our overall health. We're going to switch gears a bit in episode 3 as we explore diet and exercise. We'll examine the various dietary strategies we've seen pop up in the Western world over the last 60 years and find out which, if any, are followed by our healthy elders around the world. And when it comes to exercise, what does the research show contributes most to longevity? What kinds of movement work best? And how often should we move? All of these topics will be covered by our many experts, and of course we'll include inspiring footage from some of the longest living people around the world. Now let's get to episode 3 as we take a unique perspective on diet and exercise.
So when we think of health, we ask the question, why is food so important? Why is eating so important? And the obvious, response might be, well, because if we don't eat, then we die of malnutrition and we just run out of gas. But for most individuals, starvation is not the big issue. The issue is really, what does food mean in the broadest context of nourishment? And it's not just nourishment solely from the vitamins and minerals, protein, carbohydrate, and fat that are present within those foods. It has to do with the whole process of being in touch with the environment. Where did the food come from? How was it produced? We are part of it. We then are produced from it. Our body is made up of it.
Knowledge itself does not immunize you from living a healthy lifestyle. Right. So you could have theoretically the most knowledgeable person in the world, a professor on a certain topic, and they are not protected by their knowledge if they don't implement that into their lives. I do think that knowledge matters because in our world, our behaviors are often shaped by what's convenient and what is everybody else doing. So knowledge on something can help us make choices that are different than what everybody else is doing around you.
And this includes diet and lifestyle and emotion and community, everything that we can think of. We have to clear the muddy water. We have to think what works for my body, for my physiology, my ancestry, the situation I'm in.
We often eat when we're rushed, in a car on the way to work, or watching the news, or some YouTube video on internet, or reading something while we're eating. Many of us are not actually chewing our food because we're eating while we're driving, or we're in that fight or flight aroused state. A lot of people are eating most of their meals alone, which I think is another factor, again, because we're hardwired for social connection and interaction.
Sì, senz'altro. Si poteva parlare, i bambini, era il momento che potevi parlare con i genitori, che magari il giorno lavoravano, invece a tavola tutti insieme, normale.
Eravamo sempre 10-12 a mangiare, sempre, a tutti i momenti, al giorno, di notte, sempre. C'era una festa perché si collaboravano, tutti contenti. Quando erano a casa erano tutti contenti.
So a traditional diet actually is healthier. It's not entertainment, though. Food is entertainment in our culture. And in a traditional setting, food might be a way people gather together and connect, but it's not entertainment the way it is here.
I believe as we get older, unfortunately, we do not pay attention to our lifestyle. So we change our lifestyle. Probably we don't eat properly, and therefore the microbiome changes and we blame it on aging. Aging is not the cause of change of our microbiome. Our lifestyle is the major cause of change of our microbiome.
It is not the quality of food, it is what you host inside your gut, what you host in your body, in your skin, what I mean that microbiota. So now we need to change this very old, tell me what your food is your medicine and your medicine is your food, but I can give you any very fantastic food, but you cannot process it because you don't have the good bacteria in your gut.
One of the best examples of how diet is dependent on the environs is the Japanese, and the discovery recently in metagenomic analyses of gut flora that certain Japanese have a type of bacteria that borrowed an enzyme from a bacteria that lives on the marine seaweed that their ancestors ate. Approximately 900 years ago, there was an event where that marine bacteria that loves the nori seaweed you see in sushi jumped over into the gut flora of a Japanese person, and then that bacteria was passed on forever. And what it did is it opened up an ability to consume these sulfated polysaccharides that land evolved animals have never been able to access. That we only have approximately 17 enzyme genes encoded in our genome, and suddenly these individuals could consume several 100,000 new foods from the sea.
I believe strongly that the quality of microbiota controlled by the harmony of our life, not only about the quality of water, quality of food, ingredients. Of course, all these ingredients play a strategic role for our health. But the question whether someone who live in the mountains or in Okinawa, they have a specific diet with specific ingredients, water, air. Of course, I think our microbiota, it's like us, they hate something and they live in harmony with something. So how can we manage them? This is the big question. How can we help with symbiosis with them? And how can we avoid that we have more pathogenic strain?
I think we're starting to understand how the microbial population can really impact what foods we can and can't digest and absorb. I've seen some other studies suggesting that lactose intolerance can be cured and shifted by consuming yogurt, small amounts or increasing amounts of yogurt and other dairy fermented foods, which in a sense affects your microbiota in such a way that it starts producing the necessary enzyme to break down lactose. And there's what's happening there, and with the seaweed example, is a gene transfer between microorganisms that creates that new digestive possibility.
No teníamos esa percepción, ¿no? Porque ¿sabe por qué? Porque no había tanta comercialización. No había, por ejemplo, usted puede tener su empresa.
What we've done with food is made it acceptable to our palates. When in fact, if we go back to our roots are, getting that medicine from the plant that we no longer are getting anymore from our foods. We're not getting medicine anymore. We're just getting a clone. We're getting something that's been modified in order to taste good.
Porque eso es lo que hacen con ciertos alimentos que venden, que son muy ricos para el paladar, pero son muy malos para el organismo. Que no usemos esas cosas, que usemos lo más natural que podamos y vamos a vivir mucho tiempo, ¿verdad? Pero vivir calidad de vida, ¿verdad? No vivir en una cama.
We affect the quality of microbiota by food, and not only food, I think also drinks. I think we need this different kind of foods, different kind, as I told you, in terms of season. In terms of winter, you need maybe some more soup than summer. You need some cold salad, etc. I think we need this diversity.
La verdura genuinamente, roba genuina. Si lavoravo di più, sì, però era buona la roba. E si viveva bene, perché quando la roba è buona è un'altra cosa, vero? E coltivavo molte cose, per esempio melanzano, pomodori, melone, angurie, molte cose, per esempio.
We think, oh, we can eat whatever we want, it's fine. We're just going to process it. It's just calories, and if we don't eat too many calories, we lose weight. If we, we exercise enough, we stay in the same weight. But the truth is that food is information. It's not just calories. So understanding that the quality matters.
It's actually the microbiota that control how much ATP production is going to be put out by the mitochondria. And it's also the microbiota that determine how much ROS production or reactive oxygen species production is going to be. But the communication is not one way. The mitochondria can also produce signaling molecules saying to the gut microbiota, hey, this is all we've got, because it determines how much food you're going to eat, right? So that's the immediate energy source, is that you have to get food from the environment. And therefore, the gut microbiota has to be able to signal the mitochondria that, hey, food incoming, this is how much is coming. And therefore, the mitochondria says, okay, we can process that. But if it's too much, it says, okay, I am producing this much rusting or ROS out here. Here is the ROS, and sense it. And the gut bacteria says, oh, okay, we are going to decrease our efficiency of absorbing energy from this food.
Mitochondria do more than just take food and air and make energy. They also produce hormones in the body. A lot of people don't know that pregnenolone, which is considered the mother hormone of most other hormones, comes from, in part, mitochondria. They are responsible for folding and creating proteins, and there are specialized mitochondria around the body. Well, it's pretty important that you get all of the variables right for your mitochondria in order to be able to do that. And if they're always in energy production mode instead of in repair and maintenance mode, something called autophagy, then you end up never running your repair systems, and your cells will age because they don't have a chance to flush out cellular gunk.
Ho fatto vita per riservarla. Ho pensato sempre di non mangiare troppo e mangiare le cose potrei farmi male. Non sono stato mai goloso, mi sono potuto, così ho lavorato. Comunque lavori pesi, ho lavorato quel normale e sono rimasto così. Comunque da qui si è arrivato.
Πρώτα απ' όλα τρώω λίγο. Τρώω σε μικρό πιάτο του φρούτου και όχι σε μεγάλο πιάτο του φαγητού. Ύστερα τρώω πολύ λίγο κρέας. Ακολουθώ πολύ πιστά τη μεσογειακή διατροφή και γενικά κάνω μια υγιεινή ζωή.
I think that ancestral patterns can provide a nice template to say there's a heuristic, like what do they do? How can that guide me in the type of behavior now? So a good example would be, do I want to just get up in the morning, run a couple of miles, and then sit at my desk all day in a low-lit room at a computer? Probably not. On the other hand, do I want to get some morning light exposure? Do I want to be up and have different types of movement throughout the day, so more low intensity exposure, more high intensities? Do I want to also rest and nap? That can all be informed by thinking, how do our ancestors live? And then using that as a guide to try to help us do better across more of those domains.
Le generazioni di oggi stanno sollevando come signori, non vogliono lavorare, ma prima abbiamo fatto il lavoro sacrificato. Camminare a piedi, ora cammino in macchina, e poi lavoro, poco lavoro. Ma prima si lavorava, anche il lavoro ha fatto bene alle persone. Lavoro, camminare a piedi, si camminava a piedi al Totolì, si camminava 3 ore prima per zappare il grano. Io con mia moglie zappavamo il grano, venuti qui, la moglie facendo la cena, scorticando le patate per parlare del minestrone, e gli uomini guardando il giornale, per dire. Ma la donna ha detto premio Nobel all'uomo, doppio premio Nobel avete dato alla donna per questo tipo di lavoro. Le donne sono molto laboriose qui, le donne anziane, i giovani oggi, non so.
η δουλειά που έκανα. Γιατί όσο κάθεσαι, όσο ελαφριά είναι η δουλειά που κάνεις, τόσο λιγότερο ζεις. Όταν δουλεύεις σκληρά, είσαι πιο σκληρός.
Cuando yo era joven no teníamos tiempo, o mis papás no tenían tiempo para decirnos que mantuviéramos una figura única, ¿verdad? Porque todo era trabajo. Teníamos que ir a sembrar ayotes. Ayotes es, usted conoce lo que es un ayote, ¿verdad? Había que sembrar uno que es familiar al zucchini, que es el pipián. Teníamos que sembrar sandía. Todas las semillas las traía mi papá de Punta Arenas.
And if we look back at our ancestors and how they lived, their interaction with the dirt, their lack of sterilization, consuming huge diverse amounts of foods, not eliminating entire categories of foods because of fancy diets that they hear about, those are simple, basic things that we can adopt today that will make a huge change in our microbial community and then perpetuate health and wellness. We got to go back to basics. That's the simplest thing we can do today, and it's so highly effective.
I've got this thing about food. It's information. It's not just about the nutrients. And if you actually think about just how organisms develop, we develop the tube first, right? We develop the gut first, and then the brain and all of that comes later. And that's because what we take in is actually giving us information about our environment.
One fundamental concept that I think people really should know about is that when you think about grandma's recipes, right? A pinch of this spice here, and cooking a certain food a certain way, this information that's embedded in those formulas is as valuable and meaningful and impactful to your life and your body as the genes you inherit. More so, actually, because what we're finding is that recipes and cultural traditions and culinary practices are epigenetic inheritance systems, and that our bodies have, and as a culture, our species has outsourced gene regulation to the foods in our environment. But the masterly formulation and putting together of those types of information in relation to specific groups of people, like say living in Japan or Russia or wherever, it took thousands and thousands of years to optimize that formula. At some point in our previous evolution, what you put in your mouth, your body had to know whether it was going to kill you or nourish you. That was the largest and longest ongoing clinical trial work that occurred, and our survivability over eons today proves that this was embedded within our experience, that we knew what to eat and what we shouldn't eat, and a lot of that became crystallized into basic cultural practices, culinary traditions, recipes, and it's entirely individualized. It's so dependent on being connected to your ancestors and your ancestral, eating habits and activity habits.
One of the things that I've noticed being a nutritionist over the years is that sometimes the dietary path that we follow can become like a religion. And we might feel really wedded to it. We are connected to the ethics of that way of eating. We may see it as moral, right or wrong to eat certain foods. And so when I look at my personal view on this is that all the eating traditions are beautiful and that there are many paths to healing. And because we need a personalized path, we may traverse through multiple of those paths and it's all okay. But what we don't want to do with certain ways of thinking is get in a groove, too rigid.
One of the things that we do that really perturbs our microbiome and causes imbalances, which then can lead to significant disease, is really narrowing our dietary intake of macronutrients.
It's very trendy in the Western world to go into certain types of diets, whether it's paleo or it's FODMAP diet and all these kind of things that we love to put a label on. And what it does is it causes us to eliminate whole categories of foods. And one of the things that we know about humans is humans were omnivores, right? We survived and we perpetuated through the course of evolution because we ate everything.
食事に先ほどの方も話してたんですが、好き嫌いが本当にないんですね。いろんな食物がやはりこれから取れている栄養素、カロリーというのかな、それは知らず自然であるけれどもやはり得ている。
Mangiavo sempre, stavo bene.
No, ma canqua cosa? Canqua prato che ti piaceva da de bruso?
Sì, ci chiede, non lo so. Salate.
Salate. E altra cosa?
Carne, rostita.
Carne arrosto.
E carne bollita.
Ita sa?
Bollita, carne
Savezza budino.
Tutto, bastava.
My goal is always to have somebody eating a diet that is as diverse as possible for their individualized ecosystem. We don't want to introduce nutrient deficiencies by eating a diet that's too restricted. What that looks like for every individual is going to be different.
Humans have evolved because we can eat everything. If there's no roots and tubers, we'll go pick some fruits. If there's no fruits and vegetables, we'll kill a baboon and eat a baboon. We will eat insects. It doesn't matter. We can eat so many different things, and our microbiomes afford us that capability. The diversity in our microbiome is directly correlated to the diversity in our diet. And if you look at early humans, and even if you look at tribes like the Hazar tribe in Tanzania right now, who mimic early human dietary intake, they eat upwards of 600 different types of foods on an annual basis, and they tend to have very diverse and robust microbiomes. We eat somewhere around 15 foods on an annual basis, and that has really shrunk the capacity of our microbiome. Everything we feed our body selects for certain classes of bacteria. So if we only feed our body certain categories of foods, we only select for certain bacteria. And the thing about the ecology of the gut that's important to understand is it's not about good versus bad. It's about imbalance. And so when we feed ourselves just a narrow number of things in our daily diet, we're causing imbalance. Imbalance leads to disease.
沖縄の文化は、沖縄の風土は海の底の波動の文化。その意味で沖縄に生えている、陸に生えているすべての植物はすべて薬草、薬膳、すべて薬、そういうことで。
Should I go vegetarian or vegan, or should I eat meat or go paleo, or the spectrum goes from, let's call it, high consumption of meat or Inuit or Eskimo, 90% flesh and fat, to 10% plant food, all the way to the other extreme, which is no flesh food, only plant food.
If we want to have a healthy microbiome, the most important thing is to eat a diversity of plants. That's really what human beings have developed on. Human beings have had intermittent access to animal food, and so we have evolved to eat plants for the most part. That doesn't mean you have to be a vegetarian by any means, but half your plate should be plants of lots of different colors. And it's not only the different kinds of fibers, soluble and insoluble fibers that you find there, but all those plant pigments. These are all signaling molecules that are actually talking to your genes and changing gene expression. And this is what we mean by epigenetics, that genes get turned off and on by what we eat. So that's why it matters what you eat. Not only does it affect your microbiome and what lives in your gut, but it also influences what kind of genes get expressed, and then that affects all of our functions, our neurotransmitters, our inflammation control, our hormone balance, whether or not we can detoxify. So to feed the microbiome is simply to eat a diversity of plants in the diet and a diversity of colors. I often say, eat the rainbow.
To be honest, we always had our meat, but it's still from whatever plate you have at whatever family is 60-70% of the plate is plants, is pineapple. Yeah, things like this, as I see it. I mean, now I have a little bit more money, so I try to have meat on my plate. But you're right. Maybe from like throughout the week, the night or 2 nights we had meat it's kind of special. Yeah. Yeah.
If somebody feels the need to eat meat, one of the things I like to do is to bring in the complementary activity of plants. There are some nice studies. One that comes to mind is from Dr. David Heber at UCLA. He published this some years ago, but essentially he had a group of people. It was a small study. It was an acute feeding study where he gave them a hamburger. And for 4 hours afterwards, he measured their inflammatory cytokines. And they went up. The next time they came in for their hamburger, they had half of an avocado on it. And what he was able to show was that that initial increase of inflammatory cytokines was now blunted. So that was kind of interesting, right? So maybe it's not about what we eat, it's who we are as a person, how our body takes things in, and putting things together smarter.
Διάφορα. Φασολάκια, πατάτες, κολοκυθάκια, δεμιστά, σουφικά, αυτά. Και σφάζαμε και το γουρούνι μετά, δεν πουλούσαμε ποτέ, αλλά δεν είχαμε ψυγεία. Και πέραμε κάτι ντενεκέδες μεγάλους, η αλάτι, η λάτιζε στο κρέας, το κομμάτι, από εδώ, από εκεί. 肉用にしたらヤギとかいろんな動物がいますね。そういうのも一旦ここで養って。
Bueno, nosotros aquí como familia nos dedicábamos mucho a la cacería. Mi padre tiraba mucho venado, tepezcuintes, saínos, y nosotros como hijos íbamos a pescar en los ríos con una vara, con un chuzo, un clavo. Sacábamos barbudos, guapotes, viejas, bagres. Llevamos el montón a la casa y con eso comíamos una semana, y qué sé yo, y lo complementábamos con tortillas, con todo ese montón de cosas. La carne del monte, de venado y todo eso, la hacíamos en tiritas. Mi madre la adobaba y la poníamos a secar. Ya esa carne seca va al fuego asada y se comía con tortilla o se ponía en hebritas, se echaba un huevo y esa era la comida.
Ah, sí, eso sí, carne. De venado, de tepezcuente, todo. Bueno, la cosa más o menos andaba por ahí, parecido, porque la carne para componer, revolverla con la verdura, el plátano, banano también.
1-2 φορές τη βδομάδα κρέας. 2-3 τη βδομάδα όσπρια. Και εντωμεταξύ μέσα σε όλα αυτά είχαμε τα φρούτα μας, όποτε θέλαμε, όλα αυτά τα συνοδεύουν, οι σαλάτες τα αυτά. Ξέχασα να σας πω ότι μ' αρέσαν πολύ τα ψάρια και τρώγα παραπάνω φορές ψάρι.
Jóvenes como ustedes ahorita, en este momento, comiendo lo más sano posible, que no hay que comer carnes mentiras, uno puede comerse su carnita, ¿por qué no? Pero no usemos tanto condimentos, y para eso tenemos el ajo, la cebolla, chile dulce, y hay tantas cosas naturales que se le puede poner. y tenemos calidad de vida. Es lo único que le pido yo a la población.
Ma guardi, carne non ne andavo perché mia moglie la carne gli piaceva e la mangiava. Anche quando è morta mia moglie è morta una decina d'anni, carne non ne voglio niente, non ne mangio nulla, lo può dire lui. Carne a me non ne presente perché non ne voglio. Quando si trovava mia moglie, noi la carne la mangiavamo, però non era di questa carne che c'è adesso. Prima la carne le davamo da mangiare a noi, fava, ceci, orzo e tante altre cose, perché noi abbiamo allevato conigli, maiali. Io mangio poco adesso, mangio poco. Un po' di qualche pesca, passate, fagioli, insomma, cose del genere. Ma carne non ne mangio nulla.
Τα κρέατα καμία σχέση αυτά που φέρνουν απ' έξω τουλάχιστον τα εισαγόμενα. Τα ελληνικά κάπως ακόμα, όχι όπως ήταν όπως πρώτα. Γιατί εγώ τώρα έθρεψα 3 γουρνάκια, αλλά τους έδινα χόρτα πολλά και τους έδινα και λίγο πίτερο φλοιό από το σιτάρι, ας πούμε, δεν τους έδινα φυράματα και βιταμίνες και τέτοια, τα οποία τα έθρεψα, τα άσφαξα, στείλα το παιδιό μου και κράτησα και εγώ λίγο μες στο ψυγείο.
One of the more surprising things we noticed was that pork and fish were pretty much the only 2 commonly consumed meat products amongst all the societies we visited. But as we got a feel for their lifestyles prior to the 1960s, it actually made a lot of sense. Raising pigs was simple and required little space or effort. And because the villages we visited were all near bodies of water, fish was an easy and consistent source of food. Local wild game was hunted based on availability as well, but it was clear meat was consumed far less often and in much lower quantities than we typically see in Western cultures. And without question, according to everybody we spoke with, the largest component of their diets consisted of complex carbohydrates and starches, like rice, potatoes, beans, and vegetables. Whether they knew it or not, they were feeding their microbiota exactly what they need. When our gut microbiota metabolize these complex carbohydrates, they produce all kinds of byproducts to improve health. Byproducts like short-chain fatty acids that benefit our colon cells, fuel mitochondria, improve cellular energy, and communicate to our DNA.
One of the things you realize from evolutionary biology is that meat was kind of a delicacy in most human diets, because the amount of work it took to go and chase down an animal and kill it and eat it was significantly greater than just picking a fruit or picking a plant or digging for a root and tuber. So our microbiomes evolved to occasionally see meat. And of course that meat supports the growth of certain important bacteria. But if all we're doing is eating a large amount of meat with every single meal, if you look at the average American plate, it's the meat. And then the greens are accents around the side of the meat, right? And that really perturbs the microbiome. It causes the overgrowth of Prevotella species and certain species of Clostridia, even things like Enterobacter do better in meat conditions rather than plant-based foods. And so what we're doing is causing an unnatural imbalance within the microbiome that now has been associated with disease. Because a lot of us will have leaky gut, the saturated fat that comes from meat, and it's not, I don't want to demonize fat in general, but what happens is the saturated fat that comes from meat is incorporated by the bacteria within your gut, and they produce their endotoxin. Using the saturated fat in the meat. It just so happens that the endotoxin they produce from using fat from the meat is far more toxic than the endotoxin they would produce from using oils, let's say from seeds or from olives and things like that. And that saturated fat causes a much higher degree of toxicity in the endotoxin that they produce. So now not only are we perturbing the appropriate balance within our microbiome, but we're causing the microbes to produce more toxic versions of their natural endotoxin that they produce.
So there's diet as theory, which is on the page and we can read about and we can see where it's worked for one individual or another. And then there's diet and nutrition that works for our optimal function. And that's where we have to get out of the theory of what works for others and into what works for us.
The first problem that started maybe like 40 years ago or longer is the demonization of macronutrients. Carbohydrates, we started with fat. And then we moved to carbohydrates, and now pretty soon they're going to accuse us to have moved to proteins. And really what's always been about is people that understood what's going on I think understood they're all bad and they're all good. So fat, absolutely good and absolutely bad. Proteins, absolutely good, absolutely bad. Carbohydrates, the same, right?
There was a study that was done from researchers in Israel with, I think it was like 800 people, where they looked at several parameters, all to different types of foods that were known to raise blood sugar. And what they found was that there wasn't this standardized response. And in nutrition, it's so common just to toss one thing out. Like we say carbohydrates, that whole word with disdain, many people do. It's like, well, wait a minute, guys. We're tossing out vegetables. We're tossing out fruits. We're tossing out certain nuts, seeds, and grains that are really good for us and that might be healthful.
One of the most, I think, harmful words we've developed is the word carb, and we categorize everything as carbohydrates. Anything that's not meat or not fat or protein is carbohydrate. We would put French fries in the same category as celery. Because they're all carbohydrates. And the whole perpetuation of this notion that carbohydrates are bad for you, we all should be on low carb diets, is actually causing a significant amount of perturbation and illness within the microbiome itself. In fact, the vast majority of bacteria in our microbiome, the good, healthy bacteria that we need to have in high abundance, require carbohydrates as their primary source of food. Sure, there's our simple carbohydrates, that are made up of fructose, sucrose, glucose, and simple monomers or sugars that will increase the insulin response of the food and cause metabolic distress. But the vast majority of fruits and vegetables don't do that. Even rice, people were staying away from for a long period of time because they're saying it was so high glycemic. But rice has this really beautiful structure of carbohydrates that are branch chains that have significant different bindings to them that feed different types of microbes within the gut. For example, xylans, fructans, arabinogalactans are all really interesting bonds and linkages that you find in carbohydrates that feed very specific types of bacteria. I'll give you a great example of this is kiwi. We're now looking at this kiwi fiber that's really interesting, and we're finding that this kiwi fiber can specifically increase the growth of Faecalibacteria prosnitzi. This is a very important bacteria that's supposed to make up about 5 to 7% of our microbiome, right? So that's 5 to 10 trillion organisms is what this is supposed to make up. But in the Western population, this bacteria is really low, and low levels of this bacteria is associated with high risk of colitis, Crohn's, and other gastrointestinal disease, including colon cancer. The thing that feeds these bacteria are really interesting linkages that you find on certain types of foods. And on a kiwi, if you take a golden kiwi or green kiwi, that linkage is found on the actual peel of the kiwi. So even when we do eat the fruits and vegetables, we mess it up by taking the kiwi, slicing it open, and nicely, neatly scooping out the inside part and leaving the beautiful fibrous prebiotic parts of the outside of it. So we get so specific, and we become so ready to demonize foods and demonize whole categories of foods to the actual detriment of our microbiome. So the carb notion in general, that carbs are bad for you, is a complete myth. Carbohydrates from plants, fruits, vegetables are extremely important for the health and wellness of our microbiome. If we eat a low-carb diet, we're actually reducing the diversity of our microbiome and eliminating certain microbes that should be there in high amounts.
Yo creo que esa longevidad de las personas se debe al consumo de maíz, porque todo el guanacasteco consume el maíz, como rosquillas, tanel, arroz de maíz, atolillo, atol, todo. Toda clase de comida tiene como base el maíz. Entonces, nuestros indios, la base de ellos era el maíz también. Y esos señores eran longevos.
E monaca singadoci trova monaca corta, cioè ti fitevame, fasolaia, patates, ti para isperame, chitaletame, ilonizame, oh, panagia.
I call fiber our fourth macronutrient. It's so important and yet so underrated. Most people think about fiber in one context, helping our grandparents more easily go to the bathroom. But fiber is this really important fermentation substrate for the 30 trillion microbes that live in our large intestine. And actually, there's really good research now showing that one of the most important aspects of a healthy a super ager's diet is fiber intake.
The fuel to rebuild the cells of your intestines is called butyric acid, or butyrate. So the bacteria in your gut eats up this vegetable fiber and it creates, the exhaust of that is butyric acid.
So short-chain fatty acids are the fermentation byproduct of dietary polysaccharides that we, the host, cannot digest and produced by the gut microbiota. And the ones that predominate are acetate, propionate, and butyrate. And of those, butyrate's probably been the most studied. For decades now, it's been studied. We know that it's the primary fuel source for the colon cell, the colonocyte. About 95% of generated butyrate is used locally to keep the energy source for the colon cell. We also know that butyrate is involved with inflammation in our body, helping to regulate it in a good way. It helps the immune function in our body. Butyrate can regulate gene expression because butyrate and propionate actually are what's called histone deacetylases. And so they can modify the DNA structure, the histones, and so that ultimately can change gene expression in our body.
When you go shopping, go to a natural food or an organic food store, go to the vegetable section, look for the root vegetables, get one of every one of them. Get a kohlrabi and a turnip and a parsnip and a rutabaga and sweet potatoes. And every day you have at least one of the root vegetables as part of the meal for your family. So one day it's going to be sweet potatoes. You're going to saute them up with maybe some onions and throw some olive oil in there and they're ready in like 7 minutes. And you're feeding the good bacteria in your gut. And why do you alter the root vegetables that you're using? Because every vegetable feeds different bacteria in your gut.
What's so interesting about fiber is that fiber is technically a carbohydrate, but we absorb it as fat. So by eating a high fiber bowl of dark leafy greens, it's actually a high fat meal without adding any fat to it. Why? Because you eat this high fiber, bunch of vegetables, and the microbes actually churn out short chain fatty acids as a result. They eat those fibers. Not you. You actually don't consume those. Those fibers don't get absorbed in your small intestine. But instead, you absorb them later on in your digestive tract, in your large intestine, as fat.
What about food, diet? What does a traditional Costa Rican family eat? What's typical?
Well, we are based on rice and beans, basically. That's pretty much what we eat all the time. Even our breakfast, I don't know if you tried it already, it's called gallo pinto. And gallo pinto is no more than rice and beans mixed up together. But the white rice and the black beans are probably the main two, how do you say it?
Staple, maybe?
Yeah.
In the diet?
Like right there. I assume, as we were talking, I assume when someone invites me to their house to eat, I assume immediately it's going to be rice, beans, and something.
Okay.
Vegetables and a main course of meat, if so.
Okay.
Yeah. But we produce most of it, of course. Even here in our farm, my grandpa grew his rice up in the hill up there. He grew corn and beans. That was like probably his main 3 crops, I'd call it.
Yeah.
And besides that, a little bit of, I know he did logging and some hunting and whatever it took, because there was not even a road to get to Samara back in the day. So they did grow their own food, and until I was a kid probably, but no, not anymore, I think.
So you guys eat lots of fruits here, yeah?
Yeah.
All the time. It's not a big deal. Lots of fruits all the time.
All the fruits, and not only the ones from the supermarket or the fruit stands, but some of the others as well.
Right? You mean you just pick them off the trees? You
Yeah,
pick the
yeah,
right
yeah.
spots.
Yeah. This place right here specifically was called guayaba. Guayaba, I think the translation for guava, You know
Guava?
the fruit?
Yeah.
This part specifically was full of guayaba. I'm telling you, like fruits are here. We have a lot of mangoes, and this other fruit is called jocote that I don't know if you know.
We don't know it.
Some sort of a plum.
Okay.
Tiny plum, like a wild plum. That one is very, very good, man. When it's good, it's great, actually.
So you guys worry about fruits making you fat and lots of all that sugar being a problem?
No. What do you think? What do you mean? No.
Yeah, that's the thing in the States. People are afraid the fruits make them fat because of
How?
the sugar.
Because of the sugar.
Yeah.
Does the sugar make you fat?
No, but that's the misconception.
No, man. No, I don't.
Fruit's meant to be eaten. But it's meant to be eaten when it's ripe, and it's meant to be eaten when it's whole. Like you need to eat. But if you take 10 oranges and squeeze them into a glass of orange juice and drink it, you wouldn't eat 10 oranges. You'd eat 2. And the third one, you'd feel kind of full because it's designed to be that way, right? So, but again, every fruit has some unique mineral, something unique in it that's good for your system that you need. I do think that we do have an issue with just the access we have to that we get. We get all this fruit, half of it's picked green. It's coming in from who knows where, how they farm it, and then we're eating it all year round.
Entonces nosotros comíamos, como te repito, éramos una alimentación muy buena porque era a base de maíz y a base de arroz, que eran los carbohidratos que teníamos más ahí, los frijoles, ¿verdad? Que se cosechaban. Pero sí, mi papá y ellos sembraban que pepino, que sandía, y habían muchas hojas que ahora la gente no las come porque no las conoce. Por ejemplo, se puede comer la hoja de la yuca picada, la flor del ayote, la flor del madero negro, la verdolaga. Eran verduras, legumbres que teníamos aquí. Y mis padres sabían comerlo y sabían prepararlo y nos enseñaban a prepararlo.
Tanto los niños como los viejos consumen un 90% de frutas. Todas las épocas hay frutas. Ahorita tenemos mangos, guayabas, marañones. Y qué rico un fresco de marañón. Mi señora licúa mango tierno, mango sazón, lo licúa y ese fresco es riquísimo. Cuando hay mucho mango maduro, también le quita la cáscara y la pulpa y lo licúa, otro fresco riquísimo. Aquí, por lo general, no tomamos esos embotellados, solo comida fresco natural.
Bueno, pues gracias a Dios, como todo lo hacía uno en el Estrado, tenía de todo ahí en la casa. Porque en ese tiempo en veladora no había un árbol que papá le decía pilón, así, le hacía un hueco en medio. Y cuando el arroz estaba faltando, ponía al solear el arroz y ahí lo hacía. No faltaba eso. Y los frijoles lo mismo se cultivaban, nada más que sacarlos del saco y lavarlos y a la olla y ya está.
Their food hasn't been industrialized the way that ours has. They consume far less sugar. They consume very little, if any, added sugar. They're more active. And they consume carbohydrates that are qualitatively different. They consume a lot more fiber. Researchers speculate that our hunter-gatherer ancestors consumed about 150 grams of fiber per day. Today, on a good day, the average person consumes about 15 grams of fiber. So, regardless of the exact quantity and source of carbohydrates that we are consuming today, that change, that disparity in our fiber intake, illustrates a vast qualitative difference between the carbohydrates that we're consuming today, the dense, concentrated, processed sources of carbs that we consume today, and the carbs that we consumed for the vast majority of our evolution.
Each culture we investigated had a complex carbohydrate source or two as staple components of their diet. Complementing the few staples were always a wide variety of wild fruits and local vegetables. But their consumption depended on the season, and it was through this seasonal approach that they were able to consume such a fantastic diversity of plants. And through this variety of organic, local, seasonal, and often wild plants, their gut microbiota and mitochondria were getting valuable information about their soils and the environment. In addition, the various fibers, sugars, phytochemicals, and colors from all these plants were feeding a wide variety of microbial species and working to maintain dynamic balance and harmony in the gut. But one thing's for certain, none of these cultures thought about macronutrient ratios.
Throughout my 25 years of being in the nutrition field, what I really feel is that we've gone round and round on this whole macronutrient roller coaster and merry-go-round. You know, it's the dynamic tension of who's right, and we are always wanting to figure out like where do we need to pin the tail on? You know, is it on carbohydrates or is it on fat?
Fat is not the enemy. There's so many different types of fat. They're really great for our health and brain health. When we eat healthy fats like coconut oil or avocados or eggs, our brains could convert that fat into what are known as ketone bodies. Which is a super fuel for the brain. Things like beta hydroxybutyrate, so important for brain health. Because not only is it like a super fuel and it energizes you, it actually protects your brain, it protects your mitochondria, and actually stimulates brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like miracle grow for your brain.
The olive oil, very good. The fats from nuts, very good. The salmon fat, obviously very good, and other fatty fishes.
Dr. Weston Price was probably one of the first researchers to identify that the human diet among indigenous peoples from all over the world, no matter how different they may seem, did have similar things. And they contained higher amounts of animal fat and fat-soluble vitamins. Not necessarily exclusively, but that was the common theme that was found among indigenous peoples living around the world.
Querían un palmito, iban y bajaban una palma y venía un palmito natural. Lo comían crudo. No entiendo yo siempre he tenido una duda, tal vez es mi ignorancia, pero antes nos prohibían, no nos prohibían comer chicharrones ni esas cosas, ¿verdad? Entonces, y se cocinaba con manteca de cerdo, era el aceite. Y ahora, no, ahora hay que usar o aceite de oliva o otros aceites, y no coma chicharrones, no coma carnita de cerdo que es tan rica, no, nada de esas cosas porque es dañino. Y yo siempre he tenido eso, yo siempre me pregunto, ¿y cómo harían mis tatarabuelos? ¿Y por qué vivieron tantos años? ¿Ah?
Bueno, seguro, y como la gente solo arroz y frijoles comíamos, y serán eso lo que los ayuda. Y la manteca que estamos hablando, que era de chancho, de cerdo, pues. Porque ahora como es aceite y todo eso, supongo yo, ¿verdad?, que puede cambiar las cosas.
I started looking into the new field of nutritional psychiatry. And I realized that there's this enormous body of evidence showing a link between the foods that we eat and the ways that we live our lifestyles and how our brains work moment to moment. Once I started to do a deep dive into nutrition, I realized that, ultimately, I feel like my mom and many in her generation, and even, my generation for the most part, have been poisoned by the food supply. People tend to think that the food industry has their back when they put, nice little red heart logos on the boxes of their foods and things like that. But the profit motive is MO number one for every food manufacturer.
What role does diet play in mental health? It depends who you ask. Because if you ask a conventionally trained doctor who has had likely no more than 1 hour of nutrition education and 4 years of training before their residency, where they go on to completely neglect the subject, they would say, it's probably a good idea to eat a healthy diet, but it is in no way a causal factor in, pathology. And if you were to ask recovered patients, if you were to ask clinicians of any variety, from traditional medicine to alternative holistic functional medicine, they would all have the antithetical answer. They would tell you, actually, it is potentially the most critical starting point. And I believe nutrition, and really what we're learning in the realm of nutrigenomics, which is the way that food is an informational vector that speaks to and interacts with your genes and governs their expression. you know, that it is the most important foundational pillar. The body, mind and spirit, have a way, have a language that is used to communicate to us and our consciousness exactly what we need to know. And what we need to know is that when we're out of balance, there are, you know, some very basic steps that anyone and everyone can take to reclaim vitality.
A lot of times people come to me, they're on 5+ medications for various things, and just with a couple of tweaks to their nutrition, nothing major, but really just moving them to a diet where they're eating natural whole food in its organic state can really help to decrease someone's inflammation. So with that, they start to look at the food on their plate. They start to look at the food that they're putting in their shopping cart, which winds up in their home. And eventually, they go to the medicine cabinet and they say, I no longer need what's here. So their finances and their spending habits shift from one where you go to the pharmacy for relief to looking toward food for relief.
Dietary protocols are life jackets. You've got to go upstream from a dietary protocol and not get stuck on one concept. Now, they're really helpful, you know, because of the state that most of us are in. When we do these extreme measures of these different eating styles, these diets, they can be very helpful. But the primary is what's on the end of the fork. Is this organic? Is it pure? Is it clean?
Even things that are packaged as being quote unquote healthy, you know, they have all the bells and whistles to them. Like you see meat that'll say it's grass-fed, free range, you know, GMO free. Well, that's nice, but how is it processed? You know, all of these things they'll add, for example, in meat products, they will impregnate them with starches. And the reason they impregnate them with starches is as they go through the cooking process, it retains more water. So the bite is juicier, the weight is retained, and that impregnation with starches, then putting them through high pressure treatments because of that, perturbs and disrupts the amino acid profiles within the meat itself. Or you look at vegetables, one of the first things that any vegetable goes through in our typical food distribution system is it gets chlorine washed. You know, everything that's picked and processed, it gets chlorine washed, and then they put them through these ammonia baths and things like that that actually are supposed to kill off microbes, and then they mill them down and they put them through high heat pasteurization. You know, all of these processing things that can actually disrupt the molecular structure of the food, and it's that molecular structure of the food that's so critical to feeding the right microbes.
We look at when McDonald's moves into an area. We've seen this in parts of My Heart Got Broken in Costa Rica, where I visited, and 5 years later I visited, and there's fast food everywhere, and you already see that everyone's way higher in terms of their body weight than the last time I was there. And then you make a trip to the more rural areas and you see nothing like that.
Most people who live in a traditional culture don't have any ideologies about diet. They eat what their ancestors have grown. So we miss out on nutrient density, number one, because we have food picked before it's ripe and shipped. But we also lose that connection to our environment and what is congruent with the seasons and the soil where we are.
Once you start processing, you adulterate. And adulterate may have very small consequences, or it may have very significant consequences if you bleach and you expose things to high acid and high alkaline. The chemical composition of those materials is different. Even though the actual chemist might say they have the same atoms in them, they're going to be arranged in a very different configuration, and they're going to have a different way that they are digested, processed, absorbed, transported, assimilated, and utilized by the body.
The more we can be eating live foods, and by live foods we mean the organic and raw foods that actually have as many enzymes as they can, the better off we are digestively and also enzymatically, getting all the chemistry working in the body. I think we are too often focused on the packaged and the convenient, and there's ways that we could just be bringing in more fruits, more vegetables in particular.
We have known that microRNAs that are present in mostly in vegetable foods, they produce heavy and very important epigenetic reactions with our genome. So they modulate our genetic response and at the end our phenotype, so how we look at the end. So it's very important to have a variation of foods that are not processed, so these small molecules are not lost or altered. And if we live as close as possible to nature, this would be a natural process, and our body modulates in response to that. But if we process and elaborate our food, which may change at the chemical and molecular level, we don't even know the implication, what's going to be the result of that.
These foods that are processed, unfortunately, if you look at the ingredients labels on these processed foods, contain lots of chemicals and preservatives and artificial sweeteners and processed grains and hydrogenated oils or partially hydrogenated oils. These are the foods that are unhealthy. Over-processed seed oils like canola oil and soybean oil and safflower oil, these are unhealthy. And these are the foods that damage the gut and they damage the mouth. Certainly sodas of any type are very unhealthy. They're very acid. The mouth doesn't want to have that kind of acid all the time. So they're very acid. They have either high amounts of sugar, high amounts of phosphoric acid. They have high amounts of artificial sweeteners, which are unhealthy for a variety of other reasons. So these are chemicals that are damaging the tooth enamel. They are creating unhealthy bacteria in the dental plaque. They're changing the overall microbiome on the tongue, and when you swallow them, they're damaging the gut.
Did you eat more of a natural diet when you were a kid? Less processed food, less things from the store, more from the land? Mm-hmm. Or is it pretty much the same as you do now?
Oh no, absolutely. A lot. Everything was more natural, I guess. Not packages, like just food. As maybe when I became a teenager, I think is when I really started eating, how do you say that? Like those fried whatevers on a like your Doritos and stuff like that. Yeah, okay. We do have brands here, but not when I was a kid. I don't remember. It was mostly just fruit.
Wild foods. Yeah.
Anytime you take the food away from its natural sort of state, you're going to run into problems because the human body is adapted to eat those foods, those sort of real foods. Whenever you process anything, you're either adding something or subtracting something that you shouldn't be, and that kind of changes it. And it's sort of this hubris, if you will, of humanity, that we can be better than nature.
And one of the great things I like about the environmental working group as well is they've got the clean 15 and the dirty dozen, because people say, I don't know if I can do organic, it's so expensive. Well, yes, the food is going to be a little bit more expensive, but there's certain things that if you focus on, then you can really maximize your shopping list.
But I think we've got to be careful, because I think for a lot of people who are struggling with their health, this is quite an alien concept. I think some of these things can be really quite frightening if we now start talking about, hold on a minute, so if I buy my vegetables, I thought that was good for me, but now you're saying that it's not good for me. The whole thing gets confusing. So I think our job is to really simplify it. Say, look, from where you're at the moment, eating more vegetables, I think is going to benefit you. Could there be better farming practices that mean that our vegetables are more nutrient dense? Yeah. And we should always strive for that. But I don't think we need to fix everything straight away to start improving our health.
Eat conventional fruits and vegetables. If it's a matter of getting organic versus non-organic, then getting processed foods. That's a good step forward. Just get fruits and vegetables into your life. And as you're able to, get as much organic, non-GMO, local as you possibly can.
I was chatting to a farmer yesterday who was talking to me about the importance of microbes in the soil. And if you don't have the right microbes in the soil, the plants that grow are not going to have the right nutrients, and you can measure that. And he showed me these measurements. It was mind-blowing. So I think as a doctor about the microbes in the human body, but I thought even I'm missing a big part of the picture. Actually, we get the microbes right in the soil, then the food that's grown out of that fertile soil is going to be more nutrient dense. It's going to nourish my microbiome when I eat it. It's going to nourish my children's microbiome when they eat it. And really, I'm convinced by what I heard. I thought, wow, I'm going to go and make my own compost now in the garden and actually grow my own food with the right soil, because I don't know what I'm buying in the supermarket, how many nutrients are in that food.
The phytobiome, which relates to the environment, the organisms, the soil in which our food is grown, and how that molecular patterning that's derived from the exposure to those challenges manifests as a series of defense molecules in plants. Now, those defense molecules tend not to taste too nice. And a lot of people don't like eating vegetables, and as I said to you the other day, that feeling's pretty mutual. Vegetables prefer not to be eaten. And they try and put people off and animals off and insects off by releasing these compounds. Now, these compounds have developed with us to bind to key receptors by being metabolized by the organisms in our gut. So we're seeing a loss of diversity in humans by the bacterial composition, mixtures and functionality has changed for the worse. We go back a step, we find the same things happening in our soils. We're removing the immunologically vital component of the soil that trains the plant to maintain an effective immune response, to translate that into a chemical compound which gives them a slightly bitter taste, which when eaten is recognized by the bacteria and receptors inside our gut, then translate the information through sophisticated pathways into defenses inside of us, which makes us more robust. It means it controls inflammation, we resist infection, we resist all aspects of aging.
Nadie usaba abono. El abono era natural, de hojas podridas, de desechos de las vacas, de los monos, de todo. Y entonces usted no tenía químicos. In questo periodo mi piacciono per esempio i fichi. Fichi, ciliegie, pesche, insomma, cose naturali. Io ho un mio fratello che fa l'ortolano, no? Se ne portano ogni tanto. E si fa molto piacere, ma una cosa genuina, fatta con le sue mani, per esempio, no? Con poco diservante.
In today's day and age, in most environments, the body is bombarded by all sorts of chemicals, and we've put our bodies under a lot of functional distress trying to process out everything that we're not meant to be processing. And this takes a toll on a lot of the body's detoxification organs. This is one of the reasons why eating organic is so important, but there's more and more research that shows us that not eating organic or the chemicals that we're exposed to when we're not eating organic are tied to different disease states. So we are introducing more of that dysfunction when we introduce more of the toxic chemicals into our diet, our environment, our air, everything.
GMO means genetically modified organism. And it is, in fact, genetic engineering. It's taking a gene from one species and forcing it into the DNA of other species, or rearranging genes within the same species. The process of genetic engineering causes massive collateral damage in the DNA. So it can create allergens, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems in the food we eat. And so the problem is that the biotech industry claims that it's simply adding a trait that's predictable and precise. Nothing could be further from the truth. The most common result of genetic engineering is surprise side effects. And that's what we're seeing.
There are many GMO'd foods out there. Probably the most prevalent ones and very insidious ones are corn and soy. There's many, many more. But because corn and soy end up in so many other things that we eat unwittingly. You know, when you're going to the Mexican restaurant and having your tortilla chips, the very, very high likelihood is that you're eating GMO'd corn. When you're going to for Asian food, you know, there's soy in so many things, it's very, very, very likely that you're getting GMO'd soy. So it's sort of ubiquitous, that's out there. What I encourage people is to, you know, read labeling. And if you don't see, you know, the non-GMO label on a product that you're buying, I automatically assume it's GMO'd.
Well, who's creating GMOs? Oh, it's the 6 largest pesticide companies in this country, in the world. So what's the problem here? Why are we trusting them? Why are we believing that what they're creating is saving the planet, is doing good?
There's been over 30 years of side-by-side studies by the Rodale Institute showing that conventional and then later GMOs perform the same as the organic, but in the times of bad weather, the organic way outperforms them because it's stronger. And there's less inputs and less damage to the environment. So there's no reason for us to use GMOs.
So you have these pesticide companies creating seeds that are resistant to their pesticides to sell more pesticides. So it's no wonder that they're trying to push GMOs on farmers all around the world and trying to not disclose them to certain populations like Americans or Canadians. You know, most other countries all around the world have some sort of labeling and banning system of GMOs because consumers are aware and they have a choice. But in the US, there hasn't been any labeling of GMOs ever.
Αυτό είναι, ας πούμε, για όλοι οι καριώτες το προσπαθούν αυτό, να μην αγοράζουν προϊόντα που έχουν μέσα ψικασμένα και λιπάσματα. Εγώ δεν χρησιμοποιώ, μόνο παίρνω κοπρίας από αυτούς που έχουν πολλά ζώα. Παίρνω κοπρίας και βάζω ό,τι φυτέψω, βάζω κοπρία.
Eso lo llevan, esa contabilidad la lleva generalmente los organismos o sí, dependencias del Estado que son las que reciben y ponen en práctica, porque regalaban hasta semillas, pero tiene que abónelo con tal producto. Y ellos mismos promocionaban el producto que había que aplicarle a esas semillas para que produjeran.
Now we know from a mice study that when the mice were fed Roundup Ready soybeans for 8 months, they developed damage to their liver, to their pancreas, and to their testicles. When they were put on a non-GMO soy diet for the next month, they started to reverse. And this is the same kind of thing we're seeing in humans when they switch and in livestock, etc. We surveyed our list at the Institute for Responsible Technology and asked people, did you get better from any diseases or disorders when you switched to a non-GMO diet? And I just published in a peer-reviewed journal the results showing that 3,256 people reported improvements in 28 different conditions when they switched to a non-GMO and largely organic diet. By far, the number one symptom or condition that improved was digestive disorders. 85% of those that demonstrated improvement when they switched to non-GMO reported improvements in their digestive health, which is amazing. So part of this article, which was published in the International Journal of Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, focuses on all the ways that GMOs and Roundup and the insecticide produced by some GMOs could disrupt the digestive tract and digestive health. When the digestive health is poor, that can influence the rest of the body, the immune system, etc. One of the main problems about GMOs is Roundup herbicide. But Roundup is not just limited to GMOs. It is now sprayed as a desiccant to dry down products, to dry down crops like wheat, barley, rye, oats, and even it's sprayed on potatoes, sweet potatoes, sugarcane, sunflower. So many parts of our agricultural system use Roundup just before harvest, which means it's saturated into the crop and the food we eat. So one of the highest amounts of Roundup residues that they found is in oats, non-GMO, but they're sprayed, they absorb the Roundup, and we feed them to our children. So it's not just good enough to eat non-GMO. It's important to also avoid Roundup. So if you're not making your own products in your own garden, buy organic. Because organic does not allow GMO or Roundup or other toxic pesticides.
So we have Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring, which is credited for starting the environmental movement. That book was written in 1962, and she was talking about pesticides and their effect on wildlife and their potential effect in humans, and that was just widely dismissed by the scientific community. And years later, we're finding actually all that stuff was pretty spot on.
Now there was a study done where a small amount of Roundup was put into the drinking water of rats. And the rats developed non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which affects 25% of the US population. It can lead to cancer and cirrhosis and other problems. It's very serious. And the amount of Roundup that was consumed per day by the rats on a per body weight basis was 437,000 times lower than the amount that the EPA allows humans to consume in the United States.
Water that has below what the manufacturers say is a safe dose of things like glyphosate, the various pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and rodenticides, that the immune system cannot recognize it, but the research showed it still damages your DNA at very low doses because the immune system does not even see it.
My patients with wheat allergies, they go to Europe, and the kids eat pizza and donuts for 2 straight weeks and come back here, and walking by Cinnabon, they get a rash. And the patients realize, oh my gosh, it's our food, it's not wheat.
Do you notice anybody, locals, that have sensitivities to foods? Like, in the States, gluten is a thing that people are worried about, and dairy and corn and all these things. Is that a thing in Costa Rica where people are cautious of foods?
I don't know anybody who has a full allergy, you mean, or are sensitive to a type of food. No.
It's not a thing.
It doesn't come to mind right now, not at all.
What about digestive issues? People that you can't go to the bathroom well, or your stomach's always a mess, or anything like that. Do you, among the people that you know, does this come up in conversation? Is it something that you hear and see a lot?
No, man. No, not at all. When it comes to like just whenever you process your food, I mean, like going to the bathroom or no.
Generalmente si mangiava molto pane, molto, più le cose che si avevano in casa, perché tutti avevano il cortile coi polli, i conigli, poi c'era il maiale, tanti animali, e fuori c'erano campagna con verdure, frutta, poco naturalmente. E poi invece è venuta la guerra e allora niente, poco, proprio niente. Pane solo 2 etti. E allora niente, ho fatto un po' di dieta.
Il pane era l'elemento e l'alimento fondamentale, perché si mangiava sempre il pane con tutto. Se mancava il pane in una casa era la fine. E quindi il pane non solo era un prodotto benedetto dal Dio, dal Signore, ma era l'alimento appunto fondamentale, per cui poteva mancare tutto ma non il pane, perché era dal mattino, dalla colazione sempre, e si accompagnava poi con gli altri prodotti, cioè non si poteva mangiare nulla sostanzialmente senza il pane. Poi il pane veniva anche trasformato, si facevano le zuppe e così via, quindi non veniva mai buttato un pezzettino di pane, anche se era già di 10, 15, 20 giorni e così via, non veniva mai buttato. Ma non solo, poi il pane durava anche 15-20 giorni, poi in Ogliastra, nella Barbagia c'è il pane Carasau, i pani che durano mesi e mesi per la transumanza, perché appunto accompagnano i pastori che quindi stanno diversi mesi anche fuori dalla casa e quindi hanno bisogno del pane. Il pane è l'alimento fondamentale, ripeto.
Io quando giovane prendevo un pane grande così e uno si sflaggiava e lo mangiavo su tutta. Quando arrivavo a casa mi mangiavo 3-4 piatti di ceci e fagioli, eccetera. Mangiavo molto io, ma lavoravo pure.
Bread is an easy one to demonize, and the thing is, the vast majority of the populations in the world eat some form of bread. In fact, in many places, it's a staple part of the diet. And the thing is, grains have linkages in them that can feed very specific microbes within our gut. For example, take barley. Barley has high levels of beta-glucan, and beta-glucan is a very specific prebiotic that feeds specific types of microbes within the gut that other sources of foods just cannot feed. And so taking grain, natural good grain, and processing it into bread, which is an easy way to eat the grain, is actually a normal part of how humans evolved. And the demonization of bread will actually lead us to eating substitutes that are actually much worse. Now we have kind of grain-free breads and these things that are actually where they replace the carbohydrate portion with more fatty portions. And that actually perturbs our intake of macronutrients and also messes up the microbiome. So it's not about the bread itself, it's about our body's ability to handle the bread and the kind of bread we eat.
We have two factors here. One factor is that the food has changed, so the amount of gluten that my grandmother bread had was very low because it was not elaborated, because it let it have a fermentation process before she did it, because the wheat was different, so it had a low amount of gluten by itself, because it had a lot of fiber, so the gluten was diluted within it. So then what reached the final consumer was a very small amount of gluten. Now, because we have all this purification process, the amount of gluten is probably 10 or 20 times. So the problem is not with the adaptation, or we could eat gluten in the past and now we can't, it's that it's too much gluten now.
Che il grano, per esempio, era un grano di grande qualità e quindi questo grano era molto più saporito. Veniva prodotto nelle singole famiglie, cioè il pane era quindi il grano veniva macinato in casa, le donne si alzavano molto presto fino all'alba, sostanzialmente alle 3-4 del mattino, e quindi tutto il processo produttivo era diverso. Non c'erano i forni, c'erano i forni a legna, quindi c'era quindi anche la cottura era diverso, il sapore del grano, il sapore della farina, che quindi veniva macinata in casa anche con l'asinello ancora fino agli anni 50-60, ed era una produzione fatta in casa, locale, quindi molto diversa dalla produzione attuale. Quindi era un pane molto ma molto più saporito. Sono cambiate tante cose dopo gli anni 50, perché è cambiato tutto il processo produttivo, sostanzialmente moltissime delle qualità dei vegetali che venivano prodotti fino agli anni 50 sono cambiate, perché i grani erano grani duri, grano capelli, per esempio, altre qualità di grande pregio, poco produttive. Dimmi.
I do believe that there's a lot of evidence that gluten is a problem for some people, and I think that's pretty well known. But why are so many people now concerned about gluten and possibly reacting to gluten? When you look at the mechanics of how gluten can cause problems, it's often related to a leaky gut. The undigested protein can get into the bloodstream, and then that can create an immune system reaction and possibly biomimicry, which means autoimmune disease and all this stuff. When you look at the mechanics of how GMOs work and the Bt toxin and the Roundup and how they can promote leaky gut, it is possible that the explosion of gluten sensitivity has its basis in the explosion of the use of GMOs and Roundup. And if we look at the survey results of the big survey we did with over 3,000 people, a significant percentage of people say that their gluten sensitivity got better or was completely eliminated when they switched to a non-GMO and largely organic diet.
Io non sono un medico, quindi ovviamente non posso esprimermi al riguardo. Posso solo dire che in precedenza nessuno aveva mai pensato a questo fatto, cioè che ci potessero essere dei danni, dei pericoli provenienti appunto dal consumo del pane, perché magari appunto conteneva il glutine. Quindi non mi risulta questo, ecco, per il passato, che ci siano mai stati dei casi di gente che abbia potuto documentare, perlomeno verificare, che il pane gli faceva male. Non c'è mai stato nessun caso, insomma.
Many of the people we spoke with experienced some kind of food shortage at some point in their life, usually because of civil war or World War II. But even in times of peace, it seemed pretty clear that overeating was never really a factor. Because they were producing or sourcing all of their own food, there was a disincentive to consume more than you needed, since you would just have to produce more, which meant more work and more land. And every culture seemed to understand the negative health implications of overeating. So let's explore how meal timing and food quantity impact our mitochondria and our microbiota, which influence overall health and longevity.
And it really comes down to what you eat and when you eat. And so the what you eat gets intense sort of debate. Should you eat fat or not fat? Protein or no protein? And there's tons of debate. But what's sort of completely ignored is the sort of when to eat question.
Today's day and age, we just walk right over to the pantry, open up our refrigerator, we've got food there 24/7. It reduces our metabolic flexibility, our ability to switch between burning sugar as our primary fuel and burning fat or ketones as our primary fuel. This is really what we want, is good metabolic flexibility. When we're continually eating, we lose that metabolic flexibility. We also lose our energy efficiency. We become very energy inefficient.
The human body, did it really evolve from eating nonstop 3 meals a day every day? No. Pre-historical times, humans were not able to get food every single day. There was feast and famine. That's how we evolved. That's the reality. That's how we've been through the majority of our evolution. It's only been in the last 100 to 200 years that the availability of food has been what it is.
It's hard to imagine, with a few exceptions, an organism that wouldn't be exposed from time to time to days and days and days of no food. So we are the first, probably in history, species in history that has managed to get away from these rules.
We're now understanding that giving the digestive process a break, giving the immune system a break, by some degree of intermittent fasting seems to be really powerful.
Intermittent fasting is extremely healthy for the mitochondria and the gut microbiome, and your body just has to have a chance to rest before it goes into its normal digestive process again.
There's a host of research on the benefits of fasting. Not just intermittent fasting, but we see caloric deprivation of 3, 5, 7 days, meat fasts, dairy fasts, all sorts of different forms of caloric restriction and or restriction of certain food groups in a variety of cultures across the span of time that appears to confer some pretty remarkable longevity, or what we would call cellular autophagy benefits, like turnover of cells, cleanup of the guts, of a variety of factors that allow our body to kind of take the garbage out.
Με ζυγίσανε 15 χρονών και ήμουνα 18-300. Ήταν πόλεμος, κατοχή, μετά ήταν ο εμφύλιος πόλεμος. Όλα αυτά τα πέρασα.
Non credo, c'era di fame, molto fame. Molto fame. E quando noi, per esempio, quando eravamo, ero a Genova, Terrapisi, no? Sono partito alla parte di sopra, a Bolo, e lì facevamo qui a Bolo. Però dopo l'armistizio e l'amministrazione 150 grammi di pane solo si dava. Io avevo 19 anni solo.
So we have to appreciate that we have built-in mechanisms in our body to deal with not having the availability of food. And if you start to look at some of the research that has been done on caloric restriction and fasting, you actually find that it induces a somewhat stressful state on the body. Just like exercise is stressful on the body, that's how you gain its benefits. In the same way, fasting, the body starts to view as this is a deficit of energy and we need to start figuring out alternate ways of making fuel. And guess what they find is that many of the neuroprotective and cell protective mechanisms that have been studied, like NRF2 and SIRT1 and glutathione transferase, those enzymes are upregulated in a fasted state, in a calorie-deprived state. So we know there's benefits, and it stands to reason that if our ancestors did it, and if we've evolved this way for the majority of human evolution, then there's probably something important to learn from that.
Fasting actually dramatically improves our gut microbiome. We see the overall diversity of the different species go up. Well, when we're consuming food, depending on what we're eating, we're going to be feeding specific species of bacteria. And when we get, in a sense, too much overgrowth of certain species in comparison and in ratio with other species, we're going to have more inflammation, we're going to have lower levels of micronutrient absorption, and we're going to have higher levels of endotoxins, toxins produced within our gut that are then released into the bloodstream. So that's going to cause more inflammation throughout our body.
One of the things we're starting to understand is caloric restriction in our diet has huge benefits, health benefits and implications to our body, because one of the biggest and most toxic things we do on a daily basis is eating food. Just the process of bringing in food, digesting it, all the release of bile acids and hydrochloric acid and the breaking down of the food matter, all of this stuff causes massive amounts of bacteria die-off in our gut. When the bacteria die, they release their endotoxins and things like that. Now, if our gut is leaky at that same time, all of that stuff is getting into our circulatory system and causing inflammation. Being able to leave our microbiome alone and not feed it for a period of time is one of the healthiest things you can do for your microbiome.
What I've gotten to at this point is that I don't really eat until like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I only eat twice a day, and then the next meal is like in the evening at 8, and then I don't eat again until all the way until 1 o'clock. So I'm almost fasting every day.
Well, there's a lot of new research coming out on caloric restriction. All of it show it's beneficial. There's different types of fasting. They all seem to have an effect. There isn't like one best way that we know about, but caloric restriction seems to improve mitochondrial longevity, seems to improve bioenergetics, and it's something that is a key factor when I look at people that are starting to get chronically ill. This caloric fasting type of strategy is here to stay.
The mitochondria in your body that cannot live for 18 hours without food, they're going to die. Hallelujah. Because now the weak ones went away and they will be replaced by strong ones. And the rest of the ones now are free to say, I'm going to take all these enzymes, all this work that I'm normally doing to transform food into energy, I'm going to take that and I'm going to turn it on myself. I'm going to burn fat. I'm going to run detox processes. I'm going to create new proteins.
And when we start to do that, amazing anti-aging benefits take place, where the body starts to stimulate more autophagy, where it's almost like cellular cleansing. We start to break down old decaying cells and reuse the parts to produce new healthy cells. We have better immune regulation because we start to downregulate all these inflammatory genetic pathways like tumor necrosis factor alpha and nuclear factor kappa beta and all these different interleukins that are associated with inflammation. And so we get this incredible anti-aging effect that takes place just from basically avoiding food, not consuming food for 1 day to maybe sometimes multiple days at a time. We can get this tremendous anti-aging benefit.
But here's the problem for me. Consciously trying to control how much we're eating, if we've been overeating our entire lives, I think it can be very, very tricky. So I think the way I try and focus on that is if we remove the focus from how much they're eating to the quality of the food, often, not always, but often the intake just comes down naturally because they retune their palates. They start to, re-engage with their body's innate signals.
Cogía sin que fuera hora de comer. Pero por lo general a las 6 de la mañana o 5:30 ya está uno desayunando porque iba para el trabajo. A las 11 era el almuerzo y después la cena a las 5 o 6 de la tarde y nada más. A veces mi mamá hacía poco de pinol con leche cocinado y será la merienda en la noche para comer.
Που μας ρωτήξατε για την τροφή, για το φαΐ. Έχω σαν αρχή μου να τρώω απ' όλα. Οτιδήποτε μαγειρέψει στο σπίτι θα φάω. Απ' όλα, αλλά λίγο. Προσπαθώ όταν σηκωθώ από το τραπέζι να θέλω ακόμα λίγο.
Siempre las mujeres tienen alguna chispa. Ya ellas saben con cuánto se satisface uno. Coge el plato y le echan la medida y queda uno satisfecho.
But I do think that we're eating too much, we're snacking too much. do we really need to be having all of this? And that's the problem. If that is your cultural norm, fighting that is very hard. I think that's the secret. It's really, what are their cultural norms? Are people that are just living to those cultural norms, they just happen to be very healthy, those behaviors. Whereas I think in the West, our cultural norms drive poor health.
Our takeout culture and eating out so much, that process of being with our food, cooking our food, preparing our food, and even what happens for our digestive secretions as we start to smell food and get into that cephalic phase of digestion.
Well, I could do a little mental imagery with you right now, and I could say I'm holding a lemon, and you could think of this lemon. And then I say, now I'm going to take this lemon, and I'm going to cut this lemon with a knife, and I'm going to open it up, and the juice comes out of the lemon. You can see the juice. And now I'm going to take that lemon, and I'm going to squeeze it in my hand, and oh my word, that beautiful liquid that comes out of the lemon. Now I'm going to take that and put it in my mouth. Now I bet you're already starting to salivate, aren't you? You've never seen the lemon. You've never tasted the lemon. That's called the cephalic phase of nutrition. We have evolved a relationship with our food that we don't even need to eat it to already be in touch with it. Because you're already starting to stimulate the digestion from the parotid glands of your saliva, which has digestive enzymes, amylase, and other enzymes are going to get prepared for the meal. Now, what happens if you don't have any preparation? You don't think about it. You're unconsciously eating. You're not connected at all to your food. It's just a mechanical process. All of those things that have been evolutionary put in your body for optimal relationship to your food, you've just wiped it away. Millions of years of history.
I eat when I'm hungry. Like, I want to be hungry, and I think it's important that the system be hungry. Like, I want to be ravenous when I eat my meal, because I think the body at that point is really ready to absorb. And that if you just eat because it's noon, oh, hey, it's 8 o'clock time for breakfast, hey, it's 12 o'clock time for lunch, I think that's the body, you're making the body work way too hard.
If digestion isn't functional, we can be eating the best diet ever, or what we've determined to be the best diet ever, and still be malnourished. So we need to make sure that digestion is functional from top to bottom. We need to look at our thoughts about food and the ability of the brain to start the secretions happening that allow us to digest food. We need to look at the oral microbiome and the state of the mouth and how there's an oral systemic connection. What is happening in the mouth? What's the history of what's happened in the mouth? How are we chewing? How are our teeth? What do we have exposure to that we put in our mouths? And then we need to look at every single stage that often gets overlooked. We bypass the health of the stomach environment all too often. That stomach needs to be highly acidic to break down the food so that it can move on and do what it's supposed to do, which is ultimately deliver nutrients to the cells.
Foreign proteins not digested are allergens. So everybody gives a laundry list of all the things they can't eat because they can't digest anything because their stomachs don't work. That's the number one reason that people are losing their mind in my practice. They quit digesting their food.
Most people eat under stress. Right? Most people view their food as a stressor in their life. You know, you tell someone to eat healthy and they get stressed out about it, right? And that's not going to help them. You tell someone to eat healthy and they complain. So we live in an interesting time in human history where people are complaining about eating healthy foods. If we want to digest our meal, we have to send blood to the trunk. We have to send it to the digestive system. And in order for that to happen, we have to be in the right physiological state. We can induce a physiological state by deep breathing, by meditation, by mindfulness, by even smelling our food. These are all things that stimulate the vagus nerve, which regulates our parasympathetic function. But if you're not doing those things before you're eating, you're not preparing your system for food. If you are in a state of digestion, then you're more likely to fully digest your meal, even if it's an unhealthy meal. If you're eating healthy, then that's a huge bonus. But if you're eating super healthy and your physiology is that of a person who's under fight or flight, now you're not sending blood to the gut, and then you're still going to develop, food sensitivities and allergies, bloating, indigestion, problems with your meal, and you're going to blame the food instead of blaming the state of your physiology.
I often tell people just to take 5 before they eat. 5 breaths in and 5 breaths out.
and do it 5 times, and your whole nervous system will shift. When your parasympathetic system is active, which is the relaxation response, you burn calories faster, you absorb your nutrients better, you digest your food better, you don't end up constipated, you don't have bloating. You know, all these various factors are driven on how we actually take care of our gut.
One of the biggest takeaways for us on our travels with respect to food was the simplicity of the meals. Even today, people in these societies don't seem to overcomplicate things. The dishes were simple, as the food usually came from a nearby garden, and it was naturally flavorful without the need for commercial sauces or seasonings. One of the other things we noticed was that people in these societies weren't fit by our Western standards, but that doesn't mean they didn't exercise. Because they spent most of their life outdoors, nearly all their work involved movement. It was pretty clear that they had a very different relationship with physical activity than we have in the West. The question of movement is undoubtedly a modern dilemma, stemming from industrial revolution and the current digital era. Our requirement for movement is so drastically reduced, it can't even be compared to the lifestyles 50 years ago in small villages of Costa Rica, Greece, or Italy. So we now have to make a concerted effort to move our bodies. So the question is, what is the best way forward? How should we incorporate movement into our lives today if we want to promote longevity and optimal health in the future?
Staying healthy requires moving. In fact, if you're sedentary, which is now defined as getting less than 7,000 steps per day, the health risks from being sedentary appear to be equivalent to a 2-pack-a-day cigarette habit.
So movement and exercise is one of the key things that helps people maintain their brain function. So movement and activity, as you move and do different types of things, you activate your parietal lobe, your cerebellum, your vestibular system, they get intact, you get blood flow to your brain. As those movements and activities take place, you completely change your neuroendocrine immune response, you dampen inflammation, you turn down glial cells, you improve the blood-brain barrier, you improve the intestinal barrier, you activate your vagus. So, I mean, movement is critical for healthy aging.
We've got to avoid convenience. I mean, we've got to start taking the stairs rather than the lift or, elevator. We've got to start doing the things that we are capable of.
We evolved with movement. I mean, this, chronic sedentary lifestyle that now seems to be so pervasive in the Western world is a relatively new phenomenon.
In the West, or in certain parts of the West, we have to exercise because it's a substitute for the lack of physical activity we get from our normal days. We go to the office, we commute, usually on public transport or in a car. We go from one box in our home into another box in a car or train or bus, into another box, which is usually the office. And so we spend a crazy amount of time, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, saying we want to do everything we can within this small time frame to make up for all that sedentary time. And I don't believe it's possible.
We're in an era of fit, sick people. So we have, because a Western concept of health is largely based on what you see in the mirror, but anybody like yourself that's practiced functional medicine knows you can have people that look fantastic on camera or in the mirror, but when you run lab tests on them, you're amazed that they're even running and jumping.
So we have this idea that if you go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, then that should be enough, and then you can get to sit on the couch for the rest of the week, and then that's supposed to be fine, which is not.
So a couple of days ago, I spoke to one of the centenarians here in Guernsey. He's 103, and it's interesting. I was trying to tease out from him what has been going on in his life. And what's remarkable for me is that he didn't really think about being healthy. His life was just healthy.
No, el ejercicio era andar así y trabajar. No tenía ni ejercicio de nada. Porque yo el fútbol lo veo y nada que lo veo nunca me gustó. Trabajo era en el campo, volar machete y sembrar agricultura que llama arroz, maíz, todas esas cosas, frijoles.
Bueno, el ejercicio en estilo de vida era importante, pero llega un momento en que uno, después de tener cierta edad, como que se va cansando, pero siempre estuvo en ejercicio. La persona, el guanacasteco sobre todo, y todos acostumbramos a hacer ejercicio, pero no un ejercicio así como que preciso y que cumplido acá, sino más bien como ocasional, no un ejercicio permanente y consistente, sino que va de acuerdo a la voluntad de la persona.
Sí, yo trabajaba
La mayor parte en el campo porque uno tenía que ir a limpiar la finca, alistar los cercos para que proteger los animales, de los animales, después sembrar, después limpiar, y tamaño rato todo el tiempo casi en el monte.
They don't focus on, have I got my 3 one-hour workouts in this week? They are just generally active. They get up and they're active. They walk to the shops, to the market. They walk around. They don't sit at home on a sofa watching TV.
I asked in one of my survey, what about your leisure? And then the guy, big eyes, what is leisure? They did not use this term. There is no leisure. It seems that we do a strong difference between leisure and work. They mix the two.
In my own gym that we actually just started, we call it basic human skills. So the ability to sit in a resting squat. 9 out of 10 people in the Western world can just have their feet flat on the floor and squat down and have that as well. Sometimes they can, and then I tell them like, this is supposed to be a resting position, and they go, what? And they're out of breath, which is weird. Well, and I go, well, I'm sorry, but that's how you're supposed to poop. You're supposed to be able to sit like that, and they can't. So just the ability to stand with your feet flat on the floor and your back in the proper position, in a position that feels good, and being able to breathe freely. This is something that most people can't do.
The first thing I noticed, for kids especially, is that they are not as active. That's the first thing. I don't know if this is going to sound strange, honestly, but they don't know how to move even. Something very simple, like, for example, getting into the kayak. Like sitting in the kayak, it becomes a 30-second task. While kids here at the age of 5 or 6 are already just climbing trees and getting their fruit,
So they're climbing up these coconut trees, pulling down these
anything, mango, this papaturo tree, whatever, like these kids are really like ready to go. But these other kids, it don't matter. It ranges from very early ages, like 5 to even teenagers. They just don't know how to sit into the kayak. So when it comes to something more complicated, like coming out of the truck, even they just have odd motion. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know how to say it. They are very like with the simple tasks. They are not acting like kids.
If I could lift a heavy weight off the ground, but I couldn't pick up my friend off the floor who's injured, there's a problem there. There's a disconnect between what's actually a functional movement and what's practical. So it started making me think about there's something more than functional movement. There's practical movement. There's a wide variety of movement patterns that we need to be engaging in. That physical activity isn't just about fitness. It's about our ability to interact with our environment. So we'll do a couple of primary play games. So one's like playing tag.
Okay.
All right. So you might remember this. So basically, it's going to be tag between the hip and the knee. All right. So first person to 10. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 1, 7, 8, 9, 10. Nice. 1, 2, 3. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good stuff. As soon as I'm off, I'm still trying to keep on, yeah. Okay? Yeah. Nice. So you don't want to take part?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Good, nice, I like that. That's a good one.
I'm actually breathing hard. Everybody's looking.
So as you know, grip strength is one of the things that researchers track for longevity. So if you can maintain grip strength, you're less likely to die.
And we just heard from Michel Poulin, who shook hands with an 80-year-old in Greece and said his hand hurt for 3 days.
Wow.
Because his grip strength was so good.
Yeah.
So.
And yeah, it's important. Absolutely. It's an important test. So it's almost like a re-education.
Well, and what's interesting is you start to find your leverage points, right?
Yeah.
Learn the leverage and the height game and where your center of gravity is.
Exactly.
You start to learn that a little bit better.
So yeah, you learn when to be relaxed and when to actually hold some tension.
Yep.
And again, you know, it doesn't have to become aggressive or combative, but you know, that kind of rough housing, as you call it in the US, or rough and tumble, as we say here, you know, just like you'd play these kind of games when you were young.
Yeah.
You know, young boys used to play this all the time, but now it's like you're not allowed to.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You'd be play wrestling, you wouldn't have any technique. You wouldn't be taught, you wouldn't know what center of gravity was, nothing. So what we're gonna do is, we're gonna, again, standing start. I'm gonna push you back, but this time, rather than you trying to stay static, I want you to absorb and kind of step back.
Go with it.
And go with it. So if you push me, I'll show you what I mean. So it's gonna be like so. Okay, but and you can use as much, yeah. And you're gonna try and land softly, but you're gonna put in even more effort in. But it's my job, if I stay here, you probably break my back. So it's my job to kind of absorb it, preempt it, absorb, step back.
Okay, so you keep going with it?
And then we'll just keep, it's literally, we'll be kind of dancing back and forth, yeah? So be like so, and then, nice, okay. Good, nice. Yeah, so something like this, I can get kind of a clean response using this. So someone who's never done any kind of athletics or can't swing a kettlebell or clean a kettlebell, they can do something like this. And you get the same type of physiological response.
And you get somebody that's about the same physical activity as you, becomes this very good dance.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But again, what was that, 15 seconds maybe?
Yeah.
You start breathing a little bit, right? If I check my pulse, I bet it's going pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Right, it's not that hot outside, but yet I'm sweating a little bit.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take much, it seems to.
Exactly.
To work out.
Doesn't take much at all. We were designed to move. Why? You know, to hunt and gather foods, to build shelter, to protect those nearest and dearest to us, to be able to walk great distances, to be able to climb trees, to track animals on the ground, to be able to jump and to carry and to lift. I mean, there's all these movement patterns that I'm like, oh wow, there's so much that we should be engaging in. Nice, good balance. So you see how much core is involved,
and your brain is.
And your brain's always on fire. One of the reasons is if you can avoid using the arms and you can stop looking at your feet, then you should be able to walk backwards. It's helpful because it helps you keep focus. It's not a chronic stressor. You know what I mean? It's like if I'm complacent here,
yeah.
It's
and it's a good focus, right? Like it's something that's good to be focused on, right? As opposed to being focused on a video game or the iPad. Yeah. This is an appropriate focal activity.
Exactly.
You cannot get distracted with everything else, right? In a world that is so distracting.
Yeah.
Now you have to maintain your focus.
Maintain your focus.
You got one objective here, and that's not to fall off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, again, just play. I'm not actually really doing anything at all. I'm almost like surfing.
Yeah.
You know. But I'm like, there's no real purpose apart from, can I maintain some really good balance and control and just get into that kind of flow state, you know?
And the nice part is you're using your natural environment, right? You didn't plant this here, you didn't have to build this here.
Yeah,
right? You just walk around your environment.
If you were doing yoga and you're getting into this mindful, blissful state, you should be able to do this and have exactly the same level of almost meditation. Just being comfortable with balance, and even some of those games we played, you know, single leg, you know, brushing your teeth with your eyes closed, you know, on a single leg. Anything that's just challenges your vestibular system in a way that it isn't normally.
Well, and I can feel it in the muscles of my feet right now.
Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting.
So whether you want to be better at anything, it's still based on movements and primal patterns, and we need to be explosive, but we need to be flexible, and we need to have balance and some strength. And so the idea was, for me as a woman, what I would hear over and over and over, especially from women, was, I don't have time, I can't afford it, I'm bored, and I don't know what to do. My path for the last 10 years has been really dedicated to, we could say, health and wellness. You know, the class I call it's high X. It's a high intensity explosive training. But the whole thing with that class is, so let's say I came from professional sports where the whole idea was about performance.
exerting yourself, changing that up, lifting something that's hard, moving very quickly, things like that, and doing that on a regular basis, I think that is just a really essential kind of fundamental thing, part of being a human being. And I started saying, well, how can I incorporate all the elements of movement? So if people only come to this class 3 times a week, I'm sort of covering the basis and making it so that as they move through their life, if they're 70 or if they're pregnant or coming off an injury, that they can stand on one leg, that they can be explosive for 30 seconds, that they have enough strength to get themselves up in and out of a chair or what have you, or be a weekend warrior. So it was really just born out of that notion of how do we sort of accomplish that task. I thought, okay, now I have a chance really to make a good impact on people.
Try to think of opportunities for movement throughout the day. So I try to look at this as having movement snacks. So rather than having one huge meal every day, I try and have lots of small snacks of movement throughout the day. And I'm getting 30 seconds here, a minute there. You know, I might bear crawl. I need to get the remote. I'll bear crawl. I'll do some squats. I'll roll out of bed. I'll jump out of bed. I'll see a friend and go, hey, let's play a game. Let's see if I can pick you up and go for a run. I have that mindset now. And so it means that by the end of the day, even though I haven't really exercised or I haven't had a program, I've actually burnt a lot of calories. And I've done so many different movement patterns that I'm less likely to be injured. I'm less likely to be bored because I was just thinking about having fun.
Tell me why you're bending down with your legs and everything.
It's just a safer way. So if it's relatively light, you know, I don't need to bend my knees. I don't need to bend my back. I can throw it. If it's something a lot heavier, like so, I've got to get low, close to the object. I have to probably slide with this. You know, there's no way I can pick it up and throw it. My energy levels, or the energy system's used to change every single log. Sometimes it's quite aerobic. It's like taking a stroll. Other times, something like this here, because a lot of strength. Probably couldn't lift that without dragging it again. What I usually do during one of my playouts is I'll just move this entire block of logs from one section to the next and then back again. And that might only be like 5-10 minutes, 15 minutes work. But trust me, you feel good. And you feel as if you've achieved something. I have less allergies now. I don't have hay fever anymore. You know, since I've been in this type of environment, funny enough. Don't take antihistamines anymore. So it's a simple way, just interacting with the environment, some strength training. I'd rather do this than lift weights in the gym. That's for sure.
Maybe you can just touch upon how much you walked versus how many people were driving around. You know, were you walking everywhere?
It was all walking. Yeah, it was all walking. But I was in Nicoya already. No man, it was all walk. Even all the way to teenage. You know what? You get stuck in your ways, I guess, because when my father moved us here to the city, I hate buses, man. I was doing walks just because I didn't want to take the bus. The very example I told you about our mom and my grandmother going to do the laundry at the river, it was all by walk.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking down the river. She said like at least 2-3 kilometers just to do the laundry and come back.
Wow.
Just to do the laundry.
In the morning I go there and walk around there about 30 or 40 minutes every day. That's my exercise, walking.
Γιατί δεν υπήρχαν αυτοκίνητα, δεν υπήρχαν δρόμοι. Εγώ έφευγα όταν ήμουν μικρός από εδώ και πήγαινα στον Άγιο Κύρικο με τα πόδια για να πάρω το πλοίο να πάω στον Πειραιά. Περπατούσα ας πούμε αυτά τα 35.
In terms of exercising, in terms of longevity, there is a very, very good study, convincing study that shows that the only form of exercise ever been linked to extending your lifespan is walking. It's not jogging, it's not weightlifting, it's not yoga, it is walking. The human body is a walking machine, and if you make it walk, it actually kicks in all these genes that you need to extend your life.
Abbiamo lavorato, ho lavorato molto e ho camminato molto a piedi. Penso col gregge, dal Gennargento, facevo la transumanza verso Castiadas, verso Villa Simius, a piedi, come bestie, carichi di bagaglio. E niente, è molto pesante quel lavoro, pastore. E andavamo a svernare, a figliare le pecore, le capre, a figliare verso Villa Simius, zona caldo. Poi nel mese di maggio salivamo di nuovo al nostro terreno, al Gennargento, che è 800, 1000 metri, 1800. Quanti chilometri?
Sì, più o meno.
Cioè, 80-90 kilómetros.
Esa es, y otra cosa es que como no teníamos carro, no teníamos avión, la gente caminaba mucho y se ejercitaba.
The human body and the purpose of movement is to really explore your environment. So whether that's going out for a hike in the woods or skiing in backcountry if you're a skier, really looking at movement as a way to explore your environment is probably the best way to start to move in ways that are healthy for you.
And to me, exercise is doing something physical that you actually enjoy doing versus doing something that somebody else is telling you to doing. And some people will use exercise as a fire extinguisher. So they'll use it as a way to cope with stress, and they're actually adding more fuel on top of the fire. So if we combine something productive with something that's physical, then I think that's the best type of exercise. And you could, make it a project. You could do all these projects around your home that involve you being physically active. You can play with your children. That's very productive, and that can keep you physically active. You have to have a goal, right? Most people will exercise to lose something. Instead, why don't you exercise to actually gain something? What can you gain from this experience? And it could be mobility, it could be the ability to do something like climb a mountain or go on a hike that you've always wanted to go on. So focus on what there is to gain from it instead of what there is to lose from it.
And when I talk about physical exercise, this is not fitness on a rolling. You see, this is working actively in your garden, going to visit some neighbors, but you have to do some slope. So to move really, but to move naturally, and not to go and somewhere to force yourself to move. It's a fully different perspective, because then it will be fully integrated. And but I was so astonished that when I talk about leisure, they were really astonished. What is leisure?
Μεταφορές εμπορεύματα, αυτό ένα χωριό στο άλλο. Στις οικοδομές που κάνανε τα υλικά που κουβαλούσαν αυτή η θάλασσα, αν είχε λατομεία τότε σε αυτά, κουβαλούσαν το αμμοχάρικο από τη θάλασσα. Για να βγάλω το μεροκάματο έπρεπε να κάνω 4 δρόμους αυτοκαραβοστάω τη μέρα ή από το Κυπαρίσι στην Αρέτουσα, 4 φορές τη μέρα. Να πάω και να γυρίσω για να βγάλω το μεροκάματο. Όταν βάλεις τις 4 φορές αυτές ήταν 40 χιλιόμετρα τη μέρα.
Eravamo 3 o 4 squadre, c'erano mucchi di sale da 20-30 metri di altezza. Ma capito? Non era un divertimento.
Bueno, mejor dicho, como 2 años que lo venimos para acá, pero siempre hago poquito con el machete ahí, pero ya no hago. En ese tiempo trabajaba bastante, ahora ya no.
Και συνεχίζω να δουλεύω, δεν σταμάτησα καθόλου, ας πούμε. Είναι ξυπνώ 7 η ώρα, 7.30 και ξεκινάω και κοιμάμαι 1 ώρα το μεσημέρι και συνεχίζω πάλι το απόγευμα λίγο.
Ancora funzioniamo bene, grazie all'energia che si ha, siamo sempre in funzione. E infatti sia io sia lui si va anche all'orto, ancora per dire, al vigneto. Insomma, facciamo qualcosa, ecco. Non è che possiamo fare molto perché Anche l'età è un po', però grazie a Dio ce la caviamo bene.
You've got aerobic exercise, which is really useful to grow new brain cells, and then anaerobic or high intensity interval training is really useful to make your pre-existing brain cells more efficient.
They found high intensity exercise changes your microbiome diversity. So I think in the future we're all going to get a microbiome diverse index, and that's going to be a factor of our health. That's how we'll know healthcare has evolved, is when we walk into your healthcare provider and they go, how is your microbiome diversity index? Let's take a look at that. And how do we change that?
Exercise is actually hormetic stress. It allows you to fight and flee for a short period of time, and then you rest and recover. And that's the purpose of exercise, is to prepare you for such kinds of activities.
You could make an argument that to the degree your mitochondria are aging or are healthy, you are aging or are healthy. But that exercise seems to, again, cause that hormetic stress response, which upregulates recovery mechanisms within the mitochondria and also within our DNA. And so it's kind of a reset button. And without that reset button, the cells can kind of drift. And when they drift, they can become senescent. When they become senescent, they're alive, but they're kind of like a zombie cell. They're pumping out inflammatory cytokines and chemicals that are not healthy for the cells around them. So it's interesting that exercise almost kind of corrals our cell lines towards health instead of allowing them to head towards dysfunction.
If you've been sedentary for a while and you haven't been doing things and you've been not eating healthy, inflammatory foods, those all destroy the mitochondria. And your mitochondria are replicating all the time. So as you start to you have no desire to move and do things, but as you start to push yourself and move and start to exercise again, you start to notice you get a big boost of energy, because as you actually move, you start to get what are called mitochondria biogenesis. You actually make mitochondria. So the interesting thing about mitochondria is that they're dynamic. You can lose them, but you can also make them. So the more activity you do, the more mitochondria you make. Now, as you make mitochondria, those cells function longer.
We now understand clearly from the scientific literature that moving our bodies is turning on and off thousands of genes at any given moment in time. It's an important understanding now that whether it's from deep breathing or doing high intensity training, our gene expression changes within seconds, not just minutes or hours that we used to think. It's a very strong predisposing factor towards health states or disease states.
Movement's really anti-inflammatory. It affects every system in the body. It affects your cardiovascular system. It increases your immunity, so the more you move, the stronger your immune system is going to be. When you move, powerful opioids are released from your brain. So again, instead of turning to that medicine, instead of turning to that narcotic, just movement can release those natural opioids from your brain, and you look to yourself and movement for pain relief.
The best way to impact your lymphatic system is movement. So that's one of the key things about movement people don't talk enough about, is how it really impacts lymphatic drainage and getting rid of these waste products, which is critical for us.
For the longest time, I accepted my body, and I accepted the fact that I was going to put on weight and I was going to get less fit as I got older. It was just the way every man in my family evolved, right, as they went beyond their 40s and 50s. And then I met an American friend, a guy by the name of John Butcher. He's a famous entrepreneur, and John Butcher showed me a really interesting picture of himself at 29 and 49. And this single picture changed my entire paradigm of health. It made me realize that all the ideas in my head of what I was supposed to look like at 45 and 50 and 65 might simply be pre-programmed and not necessarily true. And in 2 years from seeing this picture, I completely transformed my health. All because something in my mind flipped and I decided I wasn't going to accept aging in the regular way.
If I didn't have a job, what would I be doing? I would be in the sun, I'd be moving, I'd be gardening, I would be sourcing water, sourcing food, and I would be playing. That's a forgotten catalyst.
And that's why I created Primal Play, because we all need to experience the joy of movement that we had as kids, as children. We didn't have a smile on our face when we were engaging in physical activity, rather than just a grimace all the time.
If you said to me, hey, you can only have one thing that you could do for your training, for your movement, it'd have to be extremely fun. Have to be fun. Because if it's fun, I'll do it all day, every day. all day, every day. And at the end, that's probably the most important thing.
It should be a case of, actually, let's have some fun. Actually find something you enjoy. Actually recognize that you enjoying the process means you're more likely to want to do it again. And then it becomes part of your movement practice, and it becomes a habit. And it becomes something that you don't have to do because you want to prove how good you are and prove your worth to other individuals, but because you want to be healthy.
Thanks for joining us on our deep dive into diet and exercise in episode 3. Did you find anything surprising? Did you expect people in these regions to have a different approach to food? Let us know what you think. We've seen firsthand how important lifestyle is to health and longevity. Being embedded with these extraordinary communities in these remote areas was literally life-changing and inspiring. We knew we had to deliver this information to as many people as possible, and that's why we've made it free for you to watch this week. However, as much as we tried, we couldn't fit all of the vital information into this 9-part series, and that's why we wanted to make it easy for you to own. If you've been enjoying this series, if you've been inspired and moved like thousands of other people, I invite you to purchase this series and become a Human Longevity Project ambassador. As an ambassador, you get lifetime access to the series. You get over 90 expert interviews, over 20 interviews from the elders, MP3s, interview transcripts, and a detailed action plan, and other great bonuses. However, it's so much more than that. You become a part of something bigger than all of us. You know, as we traveled around the world, we realized how fortunate we are in the US. Since this project is about longevity, we looked to areas that had the poorest health outcomes, especially for children, and set a mission to make a real difference there too. We're on a mission to help 1 million children by reducing the number of birth-related deaths worldwide. A portion of the proceeds from this series will go to nonprofit organizations working to save the lives of mothers and newborns in developing countries. Every day, thousands of newborns and mothers die due to birthing complications and lack of care in mostly low-resource settings. We feel it's our duty to help these countries get the supplies and resources they need to end this suffering. We can drastically reduce the complications with your help and support. To learn more, click the link below. And thank you again for being such an important part of this community. I'll see you tomorrow for episode 4.